let this roach in? Somebody called the front desk. The trash took the wrong elevator.
Marcus Sterling said that without even bothering to look up the main lobby of Whitfield and Associates, 8 a.m. 14 people heard every single word clearly. Julian remained calm and said,
"I'm Julian, your new finance intern."
Marcus's head snapped up and he said,
Finance, you? Since when can street rats read spreadsheets?
Julian didn't answer. His jaw clenched. That was it. Marcus continued.
You really think you belong in a place like this?
With that, Marcus picked up the coffee cup and slowly poured it directly down the chest of Julian's white shirt, then leaned in and whispered.
Now you look the part.
14 people in dead silence. But here's what nobody in that lobby knew. The kid dripping in coffee had a secret, and that secret was about to turn Marcus Sterling's whole world upside down. Before we dive into the story, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. 8 o'clock in the morning. The city was already submerged in the relentless rhythm of a new workday. The towering structure of glass and steel stood in the heart of the financial district like an impenetrable fortress. This was the headquarters of Whitfield and Associates, one of the most prestigious and ruthless investment firms in the country. To step through those revolving crystal doors, one needed more than just a stellar degree. They needed pedigree, a network, or, in Julian Hayes' case, an absolute undeniable competence. Julian Hayes took a deep breath, letting the icy blast of the central air conditioning fill his lungs. He smoothed the subtle crease on his crisp white shirt. It wasn't an expensive designer label, but it was perfectly pressed, carrying the warmth and meticulous care of his mother, who had spent 30 minutes ironing it the night before with unconcealed pride. Julian was a tall, young black man, his gaze steady, his angled jawline giving him a maturity that far exceeded his 22 years. He had just graduated at the top of his class, carrying immense ambition and a secret that absolutely no one in this building knew. Stepping into the polished marble lobby of Whitfield and Associates, Julian immediately felt the shift in atmosphere. The cavernous space echoed with the sharp clack-clack of polished leather Oxfords and stiletto heels striking the floor. Everything here radiated the scent of money, of influence, and of privileges passed down through generations. Julian walked straight to the reception desk, his posture impeccable. "Good morning," Julian said, his voice deep, calm, and polite. "I'm Julian Hayes, the new intern for the Financial Analysis Division." The receptionist looked up from her monitor. Her eyes flicked across his face, paused for a fraction of a second at the color of his skin, and then swept down to his navy blue suit, well-tailored but noticeably absent of high-end branding. Before her fingers could even touch the keyboard to type his name, a dry, disdainful voice echoed from the VIP elevators. "Who let this roach in? Call lobby security." 14 people in the immediate vicinity froze. The rhythmic tapping of shoes ceased. The low hum of morning chatter evaporated. Julian slowly turned his head. Stepping out of the elevator was Marcus Sterling, Senior Director and Managing Partner of the Finance Division. Marcus was the flawless embodiment of corporate arrogance. A white executive with slick-back hair, wearing a custom charcoal suit from Milan that cost more than a standard yearly lease. A solid gold Rolex Daytona flashed on his wrist with every calculated movement. Trailing exactly a half step behind him was Toby Miller, a junior associate who functioned primarily as Marcus's sycophantic shadow. Marcus approached, his pale gray eyes scanning Julian from head to toe with the precise expression of a man looking at a piece of trash that the wind had mistakenly blown into a palace. "Trash took the wrong elevator," Marcus said, his voice unraised but carrying perfectly across the silent lobby. He didn't even look at Julian's face. Julian stood his ground, his arms resting naturally at his sides. He kept his voice entirely steady, betraying not a single tremor. "Good morning, sir. I am Julian Hayes, the new finance intern." Marcus's head snapped up. An asymmetrical, mocking smile carved its way across his face. "Finance? You?" He took a step closer, intentionally using his physical presence to crowd the younger man's space. "Since when can street rats read spreadsheets?" Julian didn't answer. He didn't lower his gaze, nor did he look away. He looked directly into Marcus's eyes. The muscles in Julian's jaw tightened, forging a hard, unyielding line across his face. That was his only reaction. His stillness was not the paralysis of fear, but the calculated restraint of a superior mind. That profound composure only infuriated Marcus further. He was accustomed to people trembling, to people bowing before his authority. He despised the fact that this young black man dared to look at him with a gaze utterly devoid of submission. "You really think you belong in a place like this?" Marcus hissed through his teeth, slowly, deliberately. Marcus raised the large cup of coffee in his right hand. The lid was off. Plumes of steam were still rising from the rim, and then he tilted his wrist. The dark, scalding liquid poured directly onto the center of Julian's pristine white shirt. The coffee cascaded down his collar, soaking into the cotton, rapidly expanding into a filthy, humiliating stain. The blistering heat pierced through the fabric. Searing his skin, Marcus leaned in close, whispering in a voice as cold as ice. "Now you look the part." He tossed the empty cup into a nearby waste bin, scoffed, and walked straight toward the main exit. Toby Miller scrambled to keep up, throwing a quick glance over his shoulder at Julian. A look caught somewhere between pity and mockery 14 people. There were exactly 14 people standing in that lobby. Among them was Claire Bennett, an administrative coordinator who had been with the firm for 5 years. Claire stood less than 10 feet away, gripping a stack of folders so tightly her knuckles had turned bone white. She saw everything. The other 13 saw it all too. They heard the word roach, they heard street rats, and they witnessed the vicious degradation of the coffee pouring down the young man's chest, yet the lobby remained encased in a suffocating silence. No one stepped forward. No one offered a napkin. No one uttered a single word of protest. They simply lowered their eyes, turned their heads, and hurriedly dispersed into the corridors, pretending they hadn't just witnessed the casual cruelty of the system. The silence of the crowd was, in many ways, more brutal than the act itself. It was a silent confirmation. Here, the privilege of white executives can trample on the dignity of minorities, and it is tacitly accepted. Coffee continued to drip from the hem of Julian's shirt onto the toes of his leather shoes. The burn on his chest throbbed, but his expression remained a mask of stone. There was no blind rage in Julian's mind, no weak self-pity. He didn't yell. He didn't rush to the men's room in a frantic attempt to hide or clean himself. Julian stood perfectly still in the middle of the lobby for 10 full seconds. 10 seconds to let the bitter liquid set into the fibers his mother had ironed. 10 seconds to brand the entirety of this humiliation into his memory. 10 seconds to fully understand the rules of the world he had just entered. Then he pivoted and walked back to the reception desk. The receptionist flinched, her eyes darting away, desperate to avoid looking at the massive stain on his chest. "I need my intern welcome packet," Julian said. His voice was so eerily calm it sent a chill down her spine. Bumbling, she grabbed a flimsy, unbranded cardboard manila folder from the desk and slid it toward him. She pointed a trembling finger toward the deep hallway of the 14th floor. "Your workspace is that way. Last door, on the left." Julian took the thin folder, gave a curt nod of acknowledgement, and began his walk down the corridor. His footsteps fell in a heavy, measured cadence. He passed the main hub of the finance division. Right in the center of the open floor plan was the intern suite, a massive, glass-walled conference room, bright, pristine, and fully equipped. Julian slowed his pace just enough to observe the scene inside. There were 5 ergonomic mesh chairs, 5 brand new MacBook Pros, the plastic wrapping still clinging to the edges. 5 lavish welcome kits featuring branded tote bags, leather-bound notebooks, a welcome letter from the executive board, and a fresh fruit platter arranged in the center of the table. And sitting there were 5 interns. They were all around Julian's age, but every single one of them was white. They were excitedly setting up their passwords, laughing and getting to know each other. One of them, Haley Moore, glanced up. Her eyes met Julian's through the thick, transparent glass. She saw the sprawling coffee stain on his shirt. She saw the pathetic cardboard folder in his hand, a stark contrast to the velvet-lined boxes on her desk. Haley's lips parted slightly. A micro-expression of discomfort, tinged with pity, flickered across her face. She looked as though she might say something or perhaps raise a hand in greeting. But then she pressed her lips together, quickly turned her head away, and locked her eyes on her screen. Julian didn't break his stride. He kept walking, moving past the natural light, deeper into the forgotten corners of the 14th floor, where the air grew stale and smelled of industrial cleaner. Last door on the left. Julian stood before a scuffed wooden door, the paint peeling at the edges. There was no nameplate. He pushed it open. It wasn't an office. It was a janitorial storage closet. There were no windows. The ventilation system emitted a weak, rattling hum. Above, a single fluorescent tube buzzed and flickered relentlessly. The kind of light no one ever bothers to submit a maintenance ticket for because no one of consequence ever has to sit beneath it. There was no ergonomic chair, no MacBook, no welcome letter. Just a rusted folding metal table pushed against a raw concrete wall. Beneath it sat 3 cardboard boxes filled with archived binders from 2014 coated in dust. In the corner rested a yellow mop bucket with a wringer, a puddle of murky water stagnating at the bottom. They had shoved him in here hoping the isolation, the indignity, and the squalor would break him. Marcus Sterling wanted him to pack his bags and flee the building before lunch. Julian stood in the doorway, letting his eyes sweep the room. If anyone were watching his face, they would see nothing. No anger, no sorrow. Only the quiet, razor-sharp calculation of a young man mapping out his next move on the chessboard. He walked in, pulled a tissue from his briefcase, and wiped the layer of dust off the folding table. He unzipped his worn leather bag and pulled out his own laptop, a scratched plastic case ThinkPad he had bought off a classmate at Howard for $200. He plugged the charger into the single wall outlet and waited for the old machine to boot up. No one had given him a company network login. Julian quietly connected to the guest Wi-Fi. Beyond that concrete wall lay luxury, privilege, and the silent complicity of 14 cowards. But inside this dim storage room, under the flickering fluorescent light, Julian Hayes placed his hands on the keyboard and began to type. The bitter scent of scorched coffee still clung to his chest. Anchoring his focus, they had made a miscalculation. They thought they could step on him like a roach. They didn't know that the darkness of this room wouldn't bury Julian. Julian was going to use it to tear their entire system apart. His first day had officially begun. The fluorescent bulb on the ceiling of the storage closet continued to emit an intermittent, high-pitched bzzz, like a countdown clock signaling the slow death of a person's sanity. But Julian Hayes appeared entirely unbothered. He tilted the screen of his battered ThinkPad just enough to deflect the harsh, flickering glare, his fingers flying across the keyboard with astonishing speed. He had no internal corporate account, no access to Whitfield & Associates classified databases, and 0 professional data analysis software assigned to him. To the firm's IT network, Julian was a ghost. But Marcus Sterling had made a fatal miscalculation. He had underestimated a mind forged as the valedictorian of Howard University. Julian didn't need spoon-fed internal data to see the big picture. He quietly connected to the guest Wi-Fi, navigating straight to the Securities and Exchange Commission XC public database and pulling the annual filings of the major corporate clients Whitfield & Associates managed. He began downloading reams of quarterly earnings reports, extracting client retention rates, dissecting operating margins, and cross-referencing them with complex financial forecasting models. The dry, convoluted numbers that would blur the vision of an ordinary person danced and aligned into perfect, logical sequences in Julian's mind. He was single-handedly building a preliminary Q3 data review, a deep-dive analytical masterclass that a highly paid junior analyst would need a full, grueling week to produce. By noon, Julian had a polished 12-page draft in his hands. Clean formatting, sharp metrics, coherent comparative graphs, and 3 specific actionable recommendations aimed at reducing operational overhead and optimizing portfolio margins. Beyond the raw concrete walls of his closet, the hurried footsteps and lively chatter of the floor began to swell. The white interns from the glass suite were gathering to head out for lunch. They walked right past the slightly ajar door of the janitorial closet. Not a single one stopped. No one knocked. No one offered a passing invitation. Julian silently opened his crumpled brown paper bag and took out the sandwich he had made before dawn. He took a dry bite. The acrid smell of burnt coffee still clung violently to his chest, mixing with the musty odor of floor cleaner and rotting cardboard to create a suffocating, nauseating atmosphere. But his eyes remained glued to the screen, double-checking the placement of every comma in his profit margins. The isolation was meant to erode his will. Instead, it only sharpened it into a lethal blade. At 1:30 p.m., Julian organized his workspace, smoothed the lapels of his navy blazer to obscure the massive brown stain on his shirt, and stepped out with quiet confidence. According to the standard orientation materials he had researched on the firm's public website the night before, there was a mandatory weekly briefing scheduled this afternoon for all interns and new associates. Approaching the reinforced glass conference room in the center of the 14th floor, he saw the other 5 interns already seated around a long oak table. Their sleek MacBooks were open, their branded notebooks perfectly aligned. Standing at the head of the table by the whiteboard was Marcus Sterling. He was gesturing expansively, cracking jokes with an air of absolute superiority while drawing strategic diagrams. Right beside him was Toby Miller, nodding vigorously at his boss's every word like a wind-up toy. The room was flush with laughter, confidence, and the warm, insulated feeling of belonging to an exclusive club. Julian stopped calmly at the conference room door. Haley Moore, the intern who had made eye contact with him that morning, was hurrying down the hall from the espresso machine, clutching a folder. Seeing Julian blocking the entrance, her steps faltered. That same expression washed over her face, the micro-agony of someone who knows exactly what the right thing to do is, but is far too cowardly to do it. "Excuse me, is this the weekly intern briefing?" Julian asked. His voice was steady, polite, stripped of any malice. Haley looked past him into the room. She looked at Marcus holding court, at the 5 occupied chairs, and at the glaring absence of a 6th. Her eyes drifted slowly downward, stopping at the massive, dried coffee stain still ruining Julian's chest. She didn't answer him. She offered no explanation, no apology. She simply pressed her lips into a tight, bloodless line, squeezed past his shoulder, and pushed through the glass door. Julian stood frozen at the threshold. Inside, Marcus glanced up. The moment their eyes met, Marcus's lips curled into a sneer of utter contempt. He raised a single, challenging eyebrow, then turned his back to the glass, continuing his presentation as if Julian were nothing more than a wisp of polluted air. He had publicly, unapologetically erased Julian from the 14th floor. Julian didn't pound on the glass. He didn't make a scene. He turned on his heel and walked back to the dark storage closet. He opened his laptop and pulled up the firm's intern handbook, page 4, section 2.1. All interns shall attend weekly team briefings, regardless of division, specialization, or seniority, to ensure alignment with overall corporate strategy. He took a screenshot of the policy and saved it into a hidden folder he had created on his desktop that morning, titled Records. That folder now contained 3 files: the screenshot of the handbook, a photo of his squalid workspace next to the mop bucket, and a time-stamped selfie of the coffee stain on his shirt, taken at exactly 8:15 a.m. No one at Whitfield & Associates knew this folder existed, but it was rapidly becoming a ticking time bomb. At exactly 4 p.m., Julian ran a final check on his financial analysis report. The numbers were flawless. The logic was unassailable. He attached the PDF to an email with a strictly professional subject line: Preliminary Q3 Data Review, Julian Hayes, Finance Intern. The recipient was Marcus Sterling, his assigned direct supervisor. Without hesitation, Julian clicked Send. In his lavish corner office, boasting panoramic views of the city skyline, Marcus Sterling was sipping an overpriced espresso. His computer chimed with a new email. He clicked it open, fully intending to find some sloppy, amateurish mistake to justify firing the arrogant black kid before the sun went down. But as he read the first page and then scrolled to the second, the arrogant smirk melted off Marcus's face. His expression darkened into something ugly and dangerous. It wasn't because the report was bad. Damn it, it was brilliant, devastatingly brilliant. The sharp analysis of slipping profit margins, the blind spots in VIP client retention that even Marcus's senior team had missed last quarter. It was all laid out logically, concisely, and paired with aggressive, viable solutions, all within 12 pages. Marcus's breathing grew heavy. His massive ego and deeply entrenched white superiority had just taken a lethal blow. He could not, and absolutely would not, accept the reality that a young, broke black man, someone he felt entirely justified in calling a street rat, could produce professional value that eclipsed that of his own seasoned analysts. In Marcus's narrow, prejudiced worldview, people of color were only meant to exist in subordinate, subservient roles. If they were in a building like this, they were supposed to be incompetent diversity hires, brought in merely to satisfy some irritating corporate quota. The 12-page PDF glaring at him from his monitor shattered that delusion entirely. His humiliation quickly curdled into malicious vindictiveness. Marcus knew that acknowledging Julian's talent meant acknowledging his own inferiority. Grinding his teeth, he slammed his hand onto his mouse and hit Reply All. Deliberately copying all 46 employees of the finance department, his fingers hammered aggressively against the keys. To the team, a friendly reminder for our newest arrivals. Interns are not to send unsolicited, self-assigned reports to senior management in a transparent attempt to show off. You do not have the clearance, experience, or mental bandwidth to comprehend the macro financial picture of this firm. When I need something from you, I will assign it. Until then, learn your place. Let's keep the inbox clean and professional, MS. In the blink of an eye, 46 people on the 14th floor received that email. 46 people opened it. 46 people were smart enough to know exactly who that venomous humiliation was aimed at. And not a single person replied. Not a single person stood up to defend the young man. The system, functioning exactly as it was designed to, protected the powerful white executive and crushed the minority at the bottom. Ding, the notification echoed hollowly in the dark closet. Julian calmly opened the email. His eyes scanned the words, dripping with condescension, suppression, and racial hostility. He read it once. Then he read it again. Julian's face remained a mask of stone. His broad shoulders didn't shake. But if someone had been standing close enough to look, truly look, they would have seen his left thumb pressing against the rusted iron edge of the folding table. He pressed so hard his nail turned bone white. He pressed until the skin threatened to break, using the physical pain to ground the tidal wave of fury surging through his veins. He had been stripped of his right to work, his right to learn, and now his basic human dignity. Slowly, Julian closed the laptop. The tiny room plunged back into silence, save for the pathetic hum of the fluorescent light and the muffled sounds of people packing up to go home on the other side of the wall. The isolation wrapped around him, thick, cold, and suffocating. For the first time all day, a voice echoed in his mind. It was the exhausted, battered voice of a 22-year-old pushed to the absolute brink. Call Dad. End this. Just one phone call. One. And all of this filthy room, that racist bastard, the cowardly interns, it all disappears tonight. Julian's hand moved sluggishly to his pocket. He pulled out his phone and opened his contacts. His thumb hovered over the name saved simply as Dad. Just Dad. No last name. No title. No mention that this man was Robert Hayes, the billionaire CEO and founder of Whitfield and Associates. It was just the gentle man who had taught him how to tie a Windsor knot, the man who had clapped him on the shoulder last night with a proud smile and said, "You're going to do great there, son. I'm already proud of you." Julian's thumb hovered millimeters above the green call button. He closed his eyes. He could picture exactly how it would play out. One ring. Two, his father's deep, authoritative voice would answer. And by tomorrow morning, Marcus Sterling would be dragged out of his corner office, forced to beg for mercy. Julian held the ultimate trump card. He had the absolute power to annihilate everyone who had wronged him today. But if he made that call, he would forever just be Robert Hayes' son. He would never know if Julian Hayes, a black man standing on his own 2 feet, armed only with his intellect, was strong enough, valuable enough to survive in this ruthless, prejudiced world. Julian took a deep, shuddering breath. The stale, moldy air filled his lungs, awakening an unbreakable resolve. He opened his eyes, his gaze returning to a chilling, storm-like calm. He clicked the phone screen off and placed it face down on the scratched table. Alone in the windowless room, Julian uttered a whisper, lighter than air, but carrying the weight of a blood oath. Not yet. 8:30 in the morning, day 2. Julian Hayes walked through the revolving doors of Whitfield and Associates wearing a crisp, fresh white shirt. He had stayed up past midnight, hand-washing the coffee stain in his cramped apartment sink, hanging the shirt over the shower rod, and carefully pressing a replacement before sunrise. He wore the same navy blazer, carried the same scuffed briefcase, and maintained the exact same stoic expression, a mask that allowed no one to read his thoughts unless he permitted it. Julian had made a decision. He wasn't going to sit in that dark storage closet and wait for things to magically improve. Silent endurance was never the way to defeat a system designed to crush you. He wanted to use the building's own rules against it. He wanted to test if the professionalism and corporate ethics printed on their glossy brochures actually existed in reality. Instead of heading to the 14th floor, Julian took the elevator down to the 12th, Human Resources. Arthur Vance's office was at the end of the hall. Frosted glass nameplate, framed degrees from prestigious universities. Arthur was a white man in his 50s, a 20-year veteran of corporate survival who had outlasted restructurings, mergers, and internal purges. He knew how this building operated not from employee handbooks, but from closed-door conversations and off-the-record whispers. Officially, his door was always open. In practice, it was open so people could vent. While Arthur decided what stayed buried, Julian sat in the leather chair opposite Arthur and, for the first time, laid out exactly what had happened. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't show anger or seek pity. He presented the events exactly how he built a financial audit, with sharp, undeniable facts. The roach comment in the lobby, The scalding coffee poured on his chest in front of 14 people. The mop bucket in the windowless closet. The glass suite reserved exclusively for the white interns. The violation of Section 2.1 of the Intern Handbook. The humiliating reply all email. Julian opened his records folder on his laptop and walked Arthur through the timestamps, the emails, and the photographs. Arthur listened intently, his face creased with professional concern. He nodded continuously, using an expensive fountain pen to take meticulous notes on a yellow legal pad, writing as if documenting a grave injustice. "Julian, I hear you," Arthur said, lacing his fingers together, letting out a heavy sigh. "What you've described is severe and entirely contrary to our firm's core values. You did the right thing coming to me. I want you to know that I take this extremely serious." "Thank you, Mr. Vance," Julian replied, his posture perfectly straight. "Give me 48 hours," Arthur said, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "I will personally investigate this, involve the legal team, and follow up with you directly." Julian stood and extended his hand. Arthur gripped it with both hands, a firm, reassuring shake from an older mentor promising protection to a younger generation. Julian walked out. The door clicked shut. But the moment the latch caught, the empathetic smile vanished from Arthur Vance's face, replaced by the cold, calculating mask of a survivor. Arthur sat motionless for 60 seconds, staring at the legal pad. Julian's testimony, the hard evidence, the witnesses. The company had an anonymous hotline, an ethics board, a strict disciplinary protocol. The next logical step was to pick up his desk phone and alert the legal department. Instead, Arthur picked up his personal cell phone and dialed Marcus Sterling. "Marcus, it's Arthur." "What is it?" Marcus sounded bored. The rustle of paperwork echoing in the background. "I just had your new intern in my office. He's filing a formal complaint. The coffee, the email, the storage closet. He documented everything. He has photos, timestamps, and named witnesses." The line went dead silent for 2 seconds. And then Marcus Sterling laughed. It wasn't a nervous laugh. It was the dry, effortless chuckle of an apex predator who had sat at the top of the food chain for so long he had completely forgotten what a threat felt like. "Arthur, my friend," Marcus said, his tone dripping with condescension. "Are you really going to take the word of a Black Street kid who's been here 48 hours over mine? Over the man who built half the VIP client book for this firm?" Arthur swallowed hard. "Protocol is protocol, Marcus. He has hard evidence." "Listen to me carefully," Marcus's voice dropped, carrying the unvarnished chill of a direct threat. "I sit on the Leadership Review Board. You know, the board that approves your department's operating budget next quarter and decides who gets to keep the director's chair. Do you really want to go down this road, Arthur? For a worthless kid?" Arthur blinked. His eyes fell to the yellow notepad, where Julian's humiliation was written out in Arthur's own handwriting. A 20-year career, a 6-figure salary, a pension on the horizon. This system wasn't built to protect people like Julian. It was built to insulate rainmakers like Marcus. Arthur picked up his fountain pen. With a single, slow, deliberate stroke, he crossed out the entire page of notes. In the margin, in tiny letters, he wrote, "No action requeeback." "Are we good, Marcus?" Arthur asked, his voice stripped of its former authority. "I always knew you were a smart man, Arthur. Catch you later." The line clicked dead. Arthur tore the yellow sheet from the pad and shoved it into the bottom drawer of his desk, burying it beneath a stack of old files where it would never see the light of day. By noon on day 2, knowing HR had officially backed down, Marcus shifted from defense to a full frontal assault. He no longer bothered to mask his prejudice. He understood that in this building, his power was absolute, and his white privilege was an impenetrable shield. Marcus was in performance mode. He was leading 3 executives from a Fortune 500 partner company on a floor tour. He was projecting loudly, shaking hands, flashing his perfect corporate smile, acting as if he owned the skyline. Trailing behind him were 5 junior associates, including Toby Miller. 11 people in total. Julian was standing at the pantry counter, quietly refilling his thermos. He was trying to make himself small, to remain invisible, doing exactly what the building had taught him to do over the past 2 days. But Marcus spotted him. A malicious glint sparked in his cold gray eyes. He didn't see a human being. He saw an opportunity to flex his dominance. "Hey, Hayes, perfect timing," Marcus called out. He used his theatrical, booming voice, ensuring the entire corridor heard him. "Run down to the lobby and grab my dry cleaning, then swing by Giordano's on Clark Street for my lunch order. You know where Clark Street is, right? Or is navigating the city too complicated for you?" The 3 clients stiffened. Their smiles froze. The junior associates immediately stared at the floor. Toby Miller smirked. Julian slowly set his thermos on the marble counter. He took a breath, keeping his voice perfectly even. Mr. Sterling, I am a finance intern. I would be more than happy to assist with any project-related work. Project-related? Marcus cut him off with a loud laugh. He turned to the clients, shaking his head in mock disbelief. Do you hear this? The kid has been here 2 days, and he's trying to dictate my job descriptions. One client gave a polite, uncomfortable chuckle. The other two remained awkwardly silent. Marcus stepped closer. He invaded Julian's space until Julian could smell the espresso and expensive cologne radiating from him. Marcus's voice dropped, but it was still loud enough for the 11 people around them to hear every word. Let me make this very simple for you, Hayes. Here, I decide what you do. I decide what you are. He reached across the pantry counter and picked up a freshly brewed cup of coffee, steam still billowing from the lid. This time, he didn't throw it. That would be too crass in front of clients. Instead, he did something far more degrading. Marcus grabbed Julian's right hand. With violent, forceful pressure, he shoved the scalding paper cup into Julian's palm, using his own hand to wrap Julian's fingers tightly around it, the way an owner might force an animal to hold a bone. Your job today, Marcus hissed, is to hold my coffee, carry my bags, and keep your mouth shut. Think you can manage that? Or do I need to use smaller words for your kind to understand? Toby Miller barked out a laugh. A sharp, grating sound in the dead silent hallway. Claire Bennett, the woman who had witnessed the lobby incident, was standing 15 feet away, her hands gripping the edge of a cubicle desk. She had seen this exact scenario play out repeatedly over 5 years. Same white executive, same degradation, just a different minority target. And every time she had done the exact same thing, absolutely nothing. Julian looked down at the steaming cup in his hand. The heat seared through the thin cardboard, but it was nothing compared to the inferno raging in his mind. 11 people were staring at him. Not a single one spoke up. He held the cup for 3 full seconds of absolute silence. Then, slowly, steadily, without a fraction of a tremble, Julian placed the coffee back onto the marble counter. He didn't slam it. He didn't spill it. He simply set it down, the way a man refuses to carry garbage that doesn't belong to him. Julian looked directly into Marcus's eyes, said absolutely nothing, turned around, and walked toward the end of the hall. The wooden door of the storage closet clicked shut behind him. Marcus turned to his clients with an exaggerated shrug. Kids these days, absolutely no work ethic. He laughed. The clients didn't, but Marcus wasn't finished. By early afternoon, he made his final move to eradicate Julian's presence. He called facilities and ordered Julian's workspace to be moved. The rusted folding table was dragged out of the closet, but not to a better location. It was shoved behind a barricade of decrepit filing cabinets in a dead-end corner, flush against the freight elevator shaft. Every time the heavy industrial lift moved, the wall violently shook, emitting a deafening, grinding roar. It was the darkest corner of the floor, the place where you dumped refuse you never wanted to look at again. Simultaneously, Marcus began poisoning the well. He strolled into the glass intern suite, carrying expensive lattes to treat the group. Between jokes and corporate advice, he strategically dropped his venom. I hate speaking ill of people, but that Hayes kid, he's got a serious attitude problem. Thinks he's entitled, tried to bypass his managers on day one with some unsolicited garbage report. I heard he even went crying to HR to invent some sob story for attention. My advice? Keep your distance. Don't associate with people who don't know their place. Within an hour, the isolation was absolute. When Julian walked to the pantry for water, conversations abruptly died. Haley Moore, the girl who had previously shown a flicker of empathy, now hurried to the opposite side of the hallway, burying her face in her phone to avoid making eye contact. The herd had been successfully steered. No one was foolish enough to stand beside an outcast and risk their own career. 1:30 p.m. Julian sat alone in the dim corner by the freight elevator. The mechanical pulleys ground heavily behind him. He had no proper equipment, no welcome packet, and not a single human being within 30 feet of him. Across the floor, the bright laughter of the other interns drifted over. Living in a world he was supposed to be a part of, Julian took out his phone. He opened his contacts. He scrolled to Dad. His thumb hovered over the green button. 1 second, 3 seconds, 5 seconds. All it took was a tap. This torment would end. The power dynamic would instantly invert, and this toxic system would be obliterated by a greater force. But as he stared at the screen, he remembered the contempt in Marcus's eyes, the cowardly avoidance of Haley, and the ruthless betrayal of Arthur Vance. If he made the call, they would drop to their knees because they feared authority, not because they respected a black man named Julian Hayes. He needed to know if his own gravity was strong enough to break them. Julian ground his jaw, locked the screen, and slid the phone back into his pocket. He opened his battered laptop. He would not break. While Julian Hayes sat isolated, gnawing on a dry sandwich beside the grinding gears of the freight elevator, an event no one in the building had anticipated was unfolding at the exact opposite end of the 14th floor. It was the corner office, the largest and most lavish suite, featuring floor-to-ceiling windows that commanded a sweeping view of the financial district's skyline. This office had been locked and plunged in darkness for the past 5 weeks. But since 8 o'clock this morning, the senior executive assistant had been inside. Freshly cut flowers were arranged perfectly on the mahogany credenza, new Montblanc pens were aligned on the leather desk pad, and a crystal glass of sparkling water sat waiting. These were the meticulous preparations reserved only for the return of someone of absolute importance. And right there, positioned perfectly on the desk so it would be the first thing the occupant saw upon sitting down, was a silver-framed photograph. It showed a tall black man with silvering temples, his arm wrapped warmly around a young man wearing a Howard University t-shirt. They were both laughing, the kind of genuine, unburdened laughter shared between a father and son who truly respected one another. The brass plaque mounted on the heavy oak door read, "Robert Hayes, founder and CEO," at exactly 3:45 p.m. on the second day of the internship program. A sleek black Lincoln Town car pulled up to the main entrance of Whitfield and Associates. The uniformed driver quickly stepped out, circling the vehicle to open the rear door. A tall, imposing man in a charcoal suit stepped onto the pavement. Robert Hayes, 58, carried himself with a quiet, undeniable authority. It was the posture of a man who had built a multi-billion-dollar empire from absolutely nothing. And more importantly, a man who never forgot what having nothing felt like. The firm's name, Whitfield, was no random corporate moniker. It was his late mother's maiden name, a woman of color who had spent 30 years scrubbing toilets and polishing floors in commercial buildings just to scrape together enough money to send Robert to college. He had been out of the country for 5 weeks, negotiating market expansions in London, Frankfurt, and Singapore. But today, with no prior email, no warning, and no itinerary, he had decided to come home early. When Robert strode into the polished marble lobby, the receptionist was the first to spot him. Her eyes went wide with panic. She frantically reached for the phone to alert the 14th floor, but Robert merely raised a hand and offered a gentle shake of his head. "No need," his deep voice echoed softly. "I know the way to my own office." He stepped into the VIP elevator and pressed 14, but in massive corporate ecosystems, rumors travel faster than elevators. By the time the ding sounded and the doors slid open, the 14th floor had already gone into a state of silent, frantic red alert. Employees chatting in the aisles rushed back to their desks, straightened their ties, closed personal browser tabs, and sat up perfectly straight. The air grew thick with tension. Marcus Sterling was the first senior executive to rush forward to greet him. He immediately slipped on his flawless corporate mask, a brilliant commercial smile, a firm handshake, and an aura of obsequious manufactured confidence. "Robert, welcome back, sir," Marcus boomed, ensuring everyone on the floor heard just how familiar he was with the CEO. "We had no idea you were coming in today. The floor is running beautifully. The VIP client pipeline is incredibly strong, and the new intern class, I have to say, it's the best group we've had in years." Robert accepted the handshake, his grip warm but measured. "Good to hear, Marcus. I've been away too long. I want to walk the floor, meet the new faces." "Absolutely, sir. Right this way. Let me take you to the intern suite." Marcus practically beamed, bowing slightly to clear the path. Marcus led Robert down the brightly lit central corridor, heading straight for the glass-walled suite. Inside, the 5 white interns were sitting at their sleek MacBooks, their luxurious welcome kits neatly displayed. Upon seeing the legendary CEO in the flesh, they all shot up from their chairs, their faces a mixture of awe and nervous excitement. Robert smiled. He stepped into the room, shaking each of their hands, asking for their names, their universities, and the projects they were assigned to. His interest wasn't performative. It was entirely genuine. He was the kind of leader who looked people directly in the eye and actually listened to their answers. Marcus hovered right behind Robert's shoulder, narrating the scene like a proud showman selling his finest merchandise. "Sir, this is Haley, top of her class at Michigan. And over here is a brilliant young man who's already adding immense value to our client data analysis. The interns beamed with pride. Marcus radiated triumph. The glass suite was bathed in the warm, golden glow of success and privilege. Robert nodded, taking it all in. But then the smile slowly faded from his lips. The CEO's sharp, calculating eyes swept the room. He mentally counted the chairs, the laptops, the people. His sudden, heavy silence caused the buoyant atmosphere to instantly deflate. Marcus, Robert said, his volume unchanged, but the warmth completely stripped from his tone. I signed the intake sheet for 6 interns in the finance division. There are 5 people in this room. The temperature in the glass suite seemed to plummet 10 degrees. Marcus's face froze for a fraction of a second. He swallowed hard, desperately trying to keep the smile plastered on his face. Ah, yes, the last intern, probably still getting oriented. You know how it is, sir. Some of the new ones take a little longer to adjust to the pace. Robert's expression remained stony, but something dangerous shifted behind his eyes. It was the look of a highly perceptive man who had just caught a discrepancy in the ledger and was deciding to audit it himself. Where is he? Robert asked, his words clipped. I'm sure he's nearby, Marcus said, hurriedly stepping forward and gesturing toward the door to redirect the CEO. Why don't we head over to the West Lounge? There are 3 clients who have been waiting all morning just to shake your hand. Robert's voice didn't rise, but it ceased to be a question. It became an absolute command. Where is the 6th intern? A bead of sweat formed at Marcus's hairline. I think he might be in the east corridor. We ran into a minor space issue, so we had to set up a temporary workstation. Robert didn't wait for Marcus to finish the sentence. He was already walking. He left the sunlit, glamorous section of the floor. He walked past the gleaming conference rooms, past the bustling pantry, and headed straight into the back hallway, the one with no windows, where the lighting was dim and the air smelled faintly of industrial bleach. Marcus scrambled after him, his excuses tumbling out faster and more desperately. Robert, please. The clients really are waiting. This is completely unnecessary. We can handle this later. Robert turned the final corner and stopped dead in his tracks. The scene before him froze the air in his lungs. There, exiled in a dark, dead-end corner next to the noisy freight elevator, blocked from view by a makeshift wall of rusting filing cabinets. Sitting beneath a flickering, dying fluorescent bulb, sitting at a rusted metal folding table facing a raw concrete wall, was Julian. He was typing away on a battered, scratched plastic laptop. His pristine white shirt was ruined by a massive, filthy brown stain spread across his chest. Next to his laptop sat a crumpled brown paper bag. No welcome kit, no company equipment. Not a single human connection within 30 feet. Hearing the footsteps, Julian slowly looked up. Robert looked down at him. The hallway descended into absolute, suffocating silence. The mechanical grinding of the elevator seemed to mute itself. Marcus Sterling ceased his babbling, frozen in place like a statue. Toby Miller, who had followed out of morbid curiosity, turned into stone at the edge of the corridor. Further down, Claire Bennett pressed herself against the wall, slapping a hand over her mouth to stifle a gasp. Robert Hayes took slow, deliberate steps across the linoleum floor. His eyes never left Julian's face. When he reached the folding table, he didn't look at the squalor of the storage room beside them. He didn't look at the filing cabinets or the flickering light. He only looked at his own flesh and blood, and then, defying the cruel silence of the building, the billionaire CEO opened his arms. His voice rang out, deep, resonant, and loud enough for every coward hiding in the hallway to hear. Julian, son, stand up, and let me look at you. Julian slowly rose to his feet, and for the first time in 48 hours of pure psychological hell, his impenetrable, stoic mask cracked. It wasn't a breakdown of tears. It was sheer, overwhelming relief. The profound release of a man who, after being treated like invisible trash by a cruel crowd, was finally seen. He stepped forward. They embraced. It wasn't a stiff corporate handshake or a performative pat on the back. It was the fierce, protective grip of a father shielding his child, and a son holding onto his father's jacket like he was 12 years old again. Robert held him tightly for a long moment, then pulled back slightly, resting his large, steady hands on Julian's shoulders. He searched Julian's eyes, reading the pain and humiliation hidden beneath the stained collar. "Are you okay?" Robert asked softly. Julian nodded, a faint, exhausted smile touching his lips. "I'm okay, Dad." Behind them, Marcus Sterling's face had drained of all color. It wasn't the pale flush of embarrassment or discomfort. It was the bloodless, sickening white of a man who realizes In one irreversible second that the bedrock of his 18-year career has just evaporated into thin air. Marcus's mouth fell open, closed, and opened again, but his lungs couldn't find the air to form words. Robert, Mr. Hayes, I had absolutely no idea he was. Robert Hayes didn't turn around, not immediately. He kept his eyes on his son, silently absorbing the weight of the indignity Julian had endured over the last 2 days, then slowly carrying the terrifying, suppressed pressure of a tectonic shift. Robert turned to face the hallway. He looked at the rusted folding table. He looked at the mop bucket in the closet. He looked at the barricade of cabinets and the freight elevator. He examined the entire space with the cold, detached fury of an investigator analyzing a crime scene. Finally, his razor-sharp gaze locked on to Marcus Sterling. "Why is my intern sitting next to a freight elevator?" Marcus's voice shattered, trembling and pathetic. We had a logistical issue with the floor plan. It was strictly temporary. Sir, I was just about to... Marcus. Just one word. Quiet, lethal, absolute. I asked you a question. The silence enveloping the dark east corridor of the 14th floor was so thick you could almost hear the frantic, hammering heartbeats of the panicked men. Marcus Sterling stood rooted to the spot, his lips moving but failing to produce a single coherent excuse. He had just been caught red-handed, not by a low-level manager, but by the billionaire founder of the firm, and infinitely worse, the victim was the man's own son. Just as Robert Hayes prepared to speak, a sound shattered the absolute stillness. It was the sharp click of heels against the linoleum floor. Claire Bennett, the woman who had witnessed everything from the very beginning, who had carried the crushing weight of complicity for 5 long years, stepped forward. Her hands were still trembling, but her eyes shone with an unprecedented, fierce resolve. Mr. Hayes, Claire's voice was thin and shaking, but it was undeniably there. "I think there are some things you need to know." Robert Hayes slowly turned to look at her. The rolling fury in his eyes softened a fraction, giving way to quiet assessment. He gave a slow, measured nod. "I think you're right." He pivoted sharply, sweeping his gaze across the corridor past Marcus Sterling, Toby Miller, and the onlookers hiding in the wings. The CEO's voice cut through the air, cold and absolute. "Conference room A, 5 minutes. Everyone involved." Conference room A was located in the dead center of the 14th floor. It was a space enclosed entirely by 3 walls of reinforced, transparent glass. Anyone walking by or standing at their cubicle had a clear, unobstructed view of the interior. The crystal chandelier above burned brightly. There was no room for hidden secrets here. Robert Hayes had intentionally chosen this room to hold a corporate tribunal, a place where the truth would be dragged into the light before dozens of watching eyes. Robert sat at the head of the long oak table, radiating absolute authority. His hands were folded quietly on the polished wood. To his left sat Julian. He was still wearing the same navy blazer, the filthy brown coffee stain still glaringly visible on his collar, carrying the full, suffocating weight of 2 days of silent endurance. To his right sat Marcus Sterling. His jaw was clenched tight, his back rigid. His cunning brain was spinning at light speed, desperately trying to weave the perfect narrative to defend himself. Arrogant to the bone, he still believed he was an irreplaceable asset to this company. Across the table sat Arthur Vance, the HR director, his eyes glued to the yellow legal pad he had been ordered to bring. Beside him, Claire Bennett gripped the edges of her chair as if it were her only lifeline. Toby Miller sat slouched in the corner, his knee bouncing violently in sheer panic. Beyond the glass walls, the entire 14th floor had stopped working. Employees stood in concentric circles, holding their breath as they watched the drama unfold. Robert spoke first. He didn't rush. He didn't raise his voice. It was the tone of a man who already knew all the answers, but was giving his subordinates one final chance to tell the truth. "Julian, tell me about your last 2 days." Julian didn't look at Marcus. He looked directly at his father, not as a son complaining to his dad, but as a professional reporting facts to the head of his firm. He recounted everything in a flawless chronological sequence: the roach and street rat comments in the lobby, the scalding coffee poured on his chest in front of 14 witnesses, the squalid closet with the mop bucket, the glass suite full of welcome gifts that he was barred from entering, the weekly briefing he was excluded from, the humiliating reply-all email sent to 46 colleagues, the demand to fetch dry cleaning, and the hot cup forcefully shoved into his hand in front of clients. And finally, the dead-end corner by the freight elevator. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't express anger or add emotional embellishments. He simply laid the facts on the table, piece by piece, like ironclad evidence at a crime scene. When Julian finished, a terrifying silence fell over the room. The air was so dense you could hear the faint hum of the ceiling vents. Robert shifted his gaze. Bennett, you said there were things I needed to know. I'm listening. Claire took a deep breath. Her hands, hidden beneath the table, were shaking violently, but she knew this was her only chance to break this rotten cycle. She began to speak. She didn't just corroborate Julian's testimony. She unrolled a devastating indictment spanning half a decade. It's a pattern, Mr. Hayes. Claire's voice cracked, but she pushed through. This has been happening for 5 years. The young junior analyst who transferred out after Director Sterling publicly called her a diversity hire in a team meeting. The project manager who filed a complaint and immediately found himself on a performance improvement plan, only to be forced out 2 weeks later. And the intern 3 summers ago who quit on day 4 without a word of explanation. The system always protected him. We all knew. Every single person on this floor knew. We didn't say anything because we were terrified of retaliation. Robert let Claire's words sink into the room. Each syllable struck like a sledgehammer against Marcus's pedestal of power. Then Robert turned to the sweating man across the table. Arthur, Robert addressed the HR director. Did Julian file a formal complaint with your office? Arthur Vance looked like a man standing on the crumbling edge of a cliff. Sluggishly, he opened the yellow legal pad. The page of meticulously taken notes, crossed out by a single ruthless stroke of black ink, was exposed for everyone to see. Yes, sir. He did, Arthur croaked. And what did you do with it? Robert pressed the silent stretch for 3 seconds. Then 5, I downgraded it. Arthur confessed, his eyes dropping to the table. I classified it as informal feedback. No action required. I did it because Marcus called me. He reminded me that he sits on the board that approves my department's budget. And I chose to protect my job over doing my responsibility. Arthur slowly looked up at Julian, his eyes red with deep shame. I turned my back on you. I am deeply sorry. Robert nodded. It wasn't a nod of forgiveness, but an acknowledgement of a system that had rotted from the inside out. He turned to Toby Miller. When Mr. Sterling forced a hot coffee cup into my son's hand and told him to keep his mouth shut, were you standing there? Toby's knees stopped bouncing. All the color drained from his face. Yes, sir, I was there. But I didn't. Did you laugh? Toby opened his mouth. He wanted to say no, but his throat locked. The sheer guilt painted across his face was the clearest answer. Finally, Robert turned to Marcus Sterling. The room held its breath. Marcus had already leaned forward, his hands planted firmly on the table. The manipulative charm and debate skills he had honed over 18 years kicked into overdrive. He tried to project calm, desperate to flip the board. Robert, you have to let me explain. This is being blown completely out of proportion. The kid, Mr. Hayes, is just overly sensitive. Yes, I was harsh on him, but that's how I train my people. That's how we forge top-tier financial analysts who can survive the pressure of the market. I did all of this for the benefit of the firm. You can't just toss aside the man who brings in half the revenue on this floor over a few petty grievances. Robert Hayes' voice didn't rise half a decibel, but it dropped lower, carrying a chilling gravity far more terrifying than any shouting. I built this firm on one immutable principle, Robert said, every word landing with crushing weight. Every single human being who walks through the doors of Whitfield and Associates is to be treated with absolute dignity. Not because of who their father is, not because of the color of their skin, but because they put in the work to be here, because they earned their seat. It is our responsibility to develop them, not destroy them. He leaned forward, his piercing gaze stripping away Marcus's defenses. You didn't just disrespect my son. You humiliated, degraded, and stripped the dignity from every person in this building who was too terrified to stand up to you. And that toxicity, that filthy privilege, ends officially today. Robert stood up. Instantly, out of sheer conditioned reflex, everyone else in the room stood with him. Marcus Sterling, you are terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you out of the building. Your severance package is frozen pending a signed non-retaliation agreement. If you attempt to contact any employee of this firm outside of formal legal channels, the entire agreement is voided. Marcus stood paralyzed, his jaw slack. You can't. I am a managing partner. You can't. I just did. Robert cut him off ruthlessly. Then immediately turned to Toby. Mr. Anderson, 90 days strict probation. You are mandated to attend bias and professional conduct training. One more infraction, no matter how small. Just one, and you will follow him out the door. Toby stared at the table. Terrified to utter a single syllable, Robert turned to the HR director. Mr. Vance, you are receiving a formal top-level reprimand. Every single HR complaint filed in your office over the past 3 years will be reopened and investigated by an external, independent auditing firm. You are keeping your chair under strict probationary oversight for one reason only, because today in this room, you chose to tell the truth. Do not make me regret that decision. Arthur gave a heavy, pained nod. Yes, sir. I understand. Finally, the CEO's gaze softened as he looked toward the weeping woman. His tone shifted to one of warm, profound respect. Mrs. Bennett, what you did today required a monumental courage that most people never find in their entire careers. I am establishing an entirely new internal ethics review committee that will report directly to me. I want you to head that committee if you are willing. Claire Bennett wiped the tears from her cheeks. She let out a choked sob and gave a firm, vigorous nod. She couldn't find the words, but that nod carried the immense liberation of breaking 5 years of chains. Robert glanced through the reinforced glass walls. Outside, dozens of employees were watching. He didn't need to step out to give a grand speech. His verdicts, his words had penetrated that glass, completely shattering the culture of fear that had plagued the 14th floor for far too long. The glass door swung open. 2 security guards in dark suits stepped in, their demeanor cold and thoroughly professional. They flanked Marcus Sterling, slowly pushed himself away from the table. He looked around the room. For the first time in 18 years of climbing the ladder and stepping on others, not a single person looked at him with respect or fear. All he saw was pity and disgust. He grabbed his cell phone and car keys from the table and walked out without another word. Guided by security, the defeated executive took his heavy, final steps toward the elevator. The 14th floor was dead silent. And then the screech of a chair moving broke the quiet. Haley Moore, the intern who had looked away when Julian's shirt was ruined, who had crossed the hall to avoid him at lunch, slowly stood up from her desk. She walked across the expansive floor, stopping right in front of Julian as the others began filing out of the conference room. Dozens of eyes turned to her. Haley's eyes were red. "I'm sorry," Haley said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm sorry I didn't speak up for you." Julian looked at the young woman for a long beat. His eyes held no malice, nor the arrogance of a victor. He simply gave a small nod. "You're saying it now." The people filed out of the glass room in absolute silence. It was the heavy silence of adults realizing they had tolerated and become complicit in a cruelty they should have stopped a long time ago. Claire Bennett was the last to leave. She paused at the threshold, looked back at Julian, and gave him a gentle, deeply respectful nod. He nodded back. Between those who had been oppressed, words were rarely needed to convey true understanding. The glass room was now empty, leaving behind only vacant chairs and an executed indictment. Inside, only 2 men remained, a powerful chairman and a stained intern, a father and a son. The verdict had been delivered. Now it was time for them to face each other. When the corporate tribunal came to a close, the crowd dispersed, and the glass room was left with just 2 men. The powerful CEO, Robert Hayes, shed his corporate armor to become simply a father. He looked at his son, Julian, and asked a heartbreaking question that perhaps any parent would ask: "Why didn't you call me?" Julian's answer in that moment provides our first and most profound lesson about the value of inner strength. The 22-year-old replied that he needed to know if he could stand firm in a ruthless place like this, facing deeply prejudiced people, using his own strength and intellect. Julian didn't want to use his powerful father's name as a shield. He understood that true respect can never be bought with your background or pedigree. It must be earned through unwavering determination, undeniable competence, and an unbreakable sense of self-worth. But my friends, this story would merely be a satisfying revenge fantasy if it stopped at firing a bad boss. The departure of a toxic individual does not mean a system is completely cleansed of injustice. That is why the second lesson unfolds through the father's act of rebuilding. Robert understood that to protect vulnerable employees like his son, the company needed fundamental systemic change. From that day forward, every intern was treated with absolute equality, from their workspace to their equipment. Even more importantly, an entirely independent anti-discrimination hotline was established, operating completely outside the control of human resources. What is the lesson here? Justice is just an empty concept without transparent mechanisms to protect it. You cannot demand employees to bravely speak up when the system is designed to cover up the truth. Finally, the most powerful takeaway lies in a detail that happened in silence. While many of us might gloat seeing Marcus lose his entire career, Robert Hayes thought much bigger than that. The chairman quietly called the very man who had just degraded his son, offering to fully sponsor an anti-bias training course for him. It was a deeply humane move that showcased the immense stature of a true leader. He gave Marcus a chance to walk through the door of redemption. Through this action, he sends a powerful message to all of us. The ultimate goal of justice is not to back someone into a corner or destroy their life. The true destination is to change mindsets, to eradicate the hatred and prejudice within them, so that no one else ever has to suffer the same fate in the future. So when faced with injustice, may we all have the calm resilience of Julian, the visionary leadership to fix broken systems, and most importantly, the grace and forgiveness to leave a path open for mistakes to be corrected.